I read 7 books in January, so here's my reading wrap up. I've started a YouTube channel and I haven't given any thought to my intro. Welcome to my first video on YouTube, and it's a bookish one. In 2023, I have set myself a target of reading 100 books. Last year it was 52 and I managed to read 73, so I thought I'd be a bit ambitious. I've started strong with 7, only 93 left to go. Tiny little disclaimer that I'm not the most critical reviewer in the world. I read for entertainment, enjoyment, pleasure, so you might not get an incredibly complex commentary from me, and I try not to read reviews of books before I read them because I'm easily influenced by others' thoughts. Don't get me wrong, I love a complex, gritty, philosophical read, but I am not immune to succumbing to a Kindle Unlimited, badly written porno. I will try my hardest to make the wrap-ups spoiler-free. If I do need to spoiler, I will put a timestamp in and let you know so you can skip ahead. I'm going to review in the order that I read. So the first book I read this month was The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I'm sure everyone's heard a lot about this book by now. It's a dark academia fiction novel, and I'm going to give it a solid 5 out of 5 stars. I was initially quite intimidated to read this. Dark academia isn't a genre I ventured much into as an adult, and the blurb doesn't really give much away, I don't think. However, I was very pleasantly surprised. I know a lot of people that have read this. Everyone had absolutely glowing reviews, so I went into it really not knowing what to expect. But each sentence was just a delight. You know, some books are so descriptive, it's really hard to visualise every aspect of it. Not this book. The writing is so yummy and delicious. That's the only way I can describe it. You might disagree, but the same kind of energy I got from this book was when I was a teenager and it was my first time reading the Lemony Snicket series. Every sentence just leads you to so strongly picture the setting and the environment, and I haven't had that with a book for a really long time. It took me quite a long time to read. I was reading it on holiday. I'm normally quite a quick reader, but also I was just captivated, so I didn't really want it to end. I didn't realise till afterwards that the chapters are so long. This will get a reread from me, 100%. Fun little thing that I discovered yesterday. I was looking through old shelves in my house where kind of all the books that are falling apart are, and I actually found another copy of it. I was really annoyed that I bought it because I didn't know we had it. It's a little bit smaller, but this literally cost $6.99. Next up was the ACOTAR series by Sarah J Maas, which I read on my Kindle. There they are, all 5 books. Another hyped series, fantasy. So this series was actually a reread. I read it for the first time in May last year. I decided to reread it because I was on holiday for the first 10 days of January and I didn't want to lug loads of books out with me. So I thought this would be a good time to just smash through 5 books. This was the series that got me back into reading fantasy as an adult. When I read the first ACOTAR book, I saw it was popular. Again, I had no idea what it's about. If I see a book is popular, I don't really like to read too much into it. I just thought, I'll give it a go. I ended up absolutely loving it, which I was really surprised about. I've rated all the books differently. As a series, collectively, it's 5 stars. So I'm just going to run through them very briefly with a sentence about each book. There will be some spoilers in this section, so I'm going to try put a timestamp up so you can skip forward somewhere on the screen now. In 2022, I planned a reread of this in 2023 because I was curious to see if I would notice any more of the foreshadowing, signs and stuff that I might have missed the first time. A lot of that goes over my head as I often don't pick up subtleties in books the first time I read them. Okay, first book, A Court of Thorns and Roses, 4 out of 5 stars. I did enjoy it a little bit more on the reread. I thought the pacing was really slow the first time I read it, but I definitely enjoyed it more the second time round. Book 2, A Court of Mist and Fury, 5 out of 5 stars. I loved this one. This book is full of melodrama. Tamlin is starting to give me the ick. Feyre is obviously very traumatised, and this is the book where I finally, begrudgingly, fell in love with Rhys. I really held out hope though that Tamlin wouldn't be a dick, but... Book 3, A Court of Wings and Ruin. This one still gets a 5 out of 5 for me, but it definitely felt like it was building a lot with character development. This book felt so long to me. There is so much character development, especially with all the high fae, and it feels like a lot of setup. Book 4, A Court of Frost and Starlight. 4 out of 5. This one gets a slightly lower rating for me as it definitely feels like a bridge between book 3 and book 5. I know that's quite literally the point, but I remember being confused the first time I read it because I think it's listed as 3.5 or something, isn't it? I know it was initially released as a teaser, and it definitely is setting us up, it's more context, but yeah, 4 out of 5. Book 5, A Court of Silver Flames, 5 out of 5. This was my favourite out of the whole lot. Heavy on the smut. Love Nesta's character development. The first time I read it, I definitely felt like I was sorely missing Feyre's point of view because I don't do change very well with POVs in books, but I really enjoyed the depth of which we get into Nesta and her trauma, and I definitely enjoyed it more the second time round. The first time I read it, I was new to fantasy as a genre, so it was a little bit confusing for me with like the lore, the magic, the names, all the different types of fae, but almost a year on and I've read a lot more fantasy since then, it's definitely a little bit easier for me to understand and I felt like I got a lot more from it. There's a lot of discussion around ACOTAR and I'm going to say that I'm giving it 5 out of 5 purely for how it made me feel when I read it. I was really entertained, I was aghast, I loved the relationships, I felt invested. I was pleasantly surprised that I enjoyed fantasy as much as I did. So it's like a circumstantial 5 out of 5 for me. For my first video, it probably seems like I'm fast and loose with the 5-star ratings, but I always knew I was going to give that series a 5 again. My next and my last book read of the month was The End of Alice by A.M. Holmes. I'm smiling because I'm uncomfortable. This is fiction and it doesn't feel right to give it a star rating at all. Before I get into this book, I'm going to give a trigger warning for content about paedophilia. I wouldn't recommend anyone to read this at all, but if you do decide to read it, please look up a full list of trigger warnings and content warnings on Storygraph or Goodreads or just anything. I saw this review on Goodreads which perfectly sums it up. I don't know what to do with this book. I'm torn between putting it on my shelf forever or immersing it in boiling water and turning it into an unrecognisable pulp. This is hard to review because it was hard to read. The story is told from a paedophile serving his 23rd year in prison for his crimes, kind of set up in like a letter style correspondence, but like also memories. It's all a bit confusing. Not to compare two books just because they're similar in nature, but if you've read Lolita, the narration style is like a very, very, very ramped up version of Humbert Humbert, like obsessive times 100. It's very disturbing, very graphic. I kind of regret reading it. I finished reading this book on the 26th to the 28th of January and had plans to fit in another 2 before the end of the month, but I literally had to take a reading break after it. If you've watched my book reviews on TikTok, you know I do read like horror genre and stuff quite a lot, but essentially I never want to read this again. I can't imagine how it must have felt to write this book. I'm laughing, but this just like really ruined my month. I feel like this was a relatively short January reading wrap up because one of them was a series. That's everything I read in January. If you've read any of the books, I'd love to hear your thoughts, agree or disagree with me, or if you have any recommendations based on what I've read this month. I've moved over from Goodreads to Storygraph. I do find the review system a little bit more robust, like that you can write about pacing, etc. So add me on there or follow my reviews. There will be more bookish content on my channel alongside other styles of videos as well, but if you have any ideas of bookish content, let me know because I love filming it. I'll see you in February for another wrap up.